So again, just to review, this one was Bobo, bigger on bottom, y is equal to 0, so the HA is 0. Number 3, looking at number 3 over here, again, looking at the highest exponent, we have a 3 up top and a 2 on the bottom, so this is bigger on top, so that's bot no, so that means there is no HA, so you could put no HA or simply just write none. Okay, I would know what you mean. So Bobo bot no eats DC. All right, so we flip this over to the other side. At the top again, we have 3 more examples just for the horizontal asymptote. So this is 2 up top, and then it's a 1 down here on the bottom. So that's bigger on top. Bigger on top, bot no, so this is none, no HA, okay, and then this one is 1, and the bottom it's a 1, so that one is eats DC, so divide coefficients, so the coefficient is a 2 and a 1, so 2 divided by 1 gives me 2. And then over here we have a 1 up top, a 2 down on the bottom. So this is bigger on bottom. So that's Bobo. So the HA is y equals 0. All right, so we've kind of separated this. How do you find the VA? How do you find the HA? Okay, and now we're going to pull it all together. And we will talk about the holes as well. So we're going to kind of do everything and include holes at the end of this, or during this little part right here. So the very first thing I'm going to do is obviously the easiest thing to do. I'll kind of list out the steps right here. Is I want to find the HA first, okay, because that in my mind is the easiest. So I look at the exponents again. That's a 1, that's a 2, so that's bigger on bottom, so it's bigger on bottom, so it's Bobo. So that means the HA is 0, so y equals 0. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, okay, find the VA. Remember, the VA has its own steps. It was factor, okay, cancel, and this is where we wrote whole, right? And then set equal to 0, and solve. All right, so I'm going to factor this bottom, the denominator. So that's 1 and 2, both of which are plus and plus. Okay, then I'm going to look to see if anything cancels. It does. X plus 1 and x plus 1 cancel. All right, so immediately whenever I see that it's been canceled, that's what becomes my whole. Okay, so my whole, I still solve. This x would be x equals -1, because I'm still going to take the opposite of it, right? So if something cancels in the denominator, that becomes my whole. And then what I'm going to do with this other part, this one is my VA. So if it just stays there, it's my VA. So my VA is x equals -2. Okay, so what I'm left with in this fraction after the cancellation is this equation right here, okay? And so regardless if I put this into the calculator or I put my original equation into the calculator, I should still get a graph. And so what I want to do before I do my domain and range is plug this in your calculator. Okay, you'll see that the VA is at -2. So I draw the VA at -2, the HA is 0, okay, and then we just grab some points and look at our graph and do it as close as possible to see what it's going to be like. And so what I have here is a point, I believe, at -3, -1, and so I believe there's a point back over here as well. And then I have my graph. Okay, now one thing we do need to include, since we had a hole at -1, okay, what I need to do, that's why I left that off, I meant to put a hole. This hole, I'm going to make an open dot. Okay, so I meant to do an open dot right here at -1. So on my graph, where -1 would intersect with my graph, okay, I put an open circle. So that tells me that there's a hole right there at -1. It looks like -1, 1, because that's where it would intersect that part of the graph. And so I just draw an open dot so that you show me that that hole is there. And so now I can do the domain and range. So the domain, -infinity to +infinity. So this is all reals. And then x cannot be the two values that I have here. -2, because that's the VA. And it can't be -1 either, because that is my hole. So there's two things that it can't be equal to now. And then my range is all reals, and y cannot be equal to 0. Okay? And so then we'll do number 2 as well. Again, first thing I find is the HA. So I look at highest exponent. So that one is bigger on top. No, so that's botno. No HA, so for the HA we just put none. Okay. Then what I do is I factor anything. So with the VA, I go ahead and factor. Normally we factor the denominator, but here we have to factor the numerator. So again, I've done this ahead of time. This factors to give me 2x minus 1 and x plus 1. Okay, and so then I look to cancel anything, right? So 1 was factor, we did that step. 2 is cancel. Okay, and 3 is set equal to 0, right? So this cancels. Since that canceled, it becomes a hole. So we do have a hole at x equals -1, okay, because we would solve that, right? And this is what I'm left with in my equation, just a 2x minus 1. So there is no VA here either, because there's nothing left in the denominator. So this is also none. So really all that we have now is a linear equation. So if I plug this into my calculator, when I graph this, okay, I have values, let's say right there, and then I will have a straight line. I'll try and make it as straight as I can. Oh, okay, but what I also have to do is include this hole. So I have a hole at -1. So here's -1 for my x, and where would that intersect my graph? At this point right here. So I draw an open dot to show that there's a gap right here. That's what it basically does. Our line goes here, it gets to this value, it skips over that, and it continues. Okay, so I do have a hole right there. So my domain is going to be all real numbers, except x cannot be equal to -1, because that's where I have a hole. And then my range is simply all reals. Okay. And then finally, number 3. Again, HA, that's 2/2, so that's eats DC, so that's a 1 and a 1. 1 divided by 1 is 1, so y equals 1 for that. And then I go ahead and factor. So this is x and x, 1 and 2. So we have -1, x minus 1, and x plus 2 here. This is special up top. This is the difference of squares. So that gives me x minus 1, x plus 1. And so we notice that the x minus 1's cancel. So that is my hole. So again, x minus 1 is equal to 0, gives me x is equal to 1. And then my VA right here, this is my VA. So I take the opposite of that because we solve it, right? So this is x equals -2. All right, and so what I have left is x plus 1 over x plus 2. And so whenever I graph that, again, I start with my HA and VA. So my VA is -2. So there's my VA. My HA is 1. So there's my HA, and those are my guidelines. When I plug this into my calculator, right, I should get points there and there. So I draw my graph. And then the last thing I do is I put where a hole would be. So a hole would be at x equals 1. So here's when x is equal to 1, where would that intersect my graph? At this point right here. So I put an open dot to show that I have a hole there in my graph. And then I can go ahead and finish up the domain and range. So the domain here, all reals, x cannot equal -2 or +1. And then the range is all reals, and y cannot equal 1.